Right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Fazlifts podcast 4. I've got special guest Marc Thrasivoulou on. Marc is a natural bodybuilder, coach, father, soon-to-be husband, and he's an expert on eating disorders. It's something that I wanted to talk about today, and that's going to be the focus of today's podcast. So Marc and I have been friends for a good number of years, going back to doing powerlifting seminars with each other, and then later on we worked together for his first bodybuilding competition, which was a really great experience. Marc, do you want to say hello? Just introduce yourself.
Yeah. So my name's Marc. I've known Faz for about 3 or 4 years now.
Yeah.
And we've been Faz has been my coach, and we've been really good friends as well. In addition to that, so we've been on quite a few journeys together. Looking forward to getting into the meat of this podcast and hopefully educating a few people on eating disorders and other types of things, really. So I like to keep it maybe focused on eating disorders, but also relatively broad, because obviously it can almost encapsulate a variety of different areas and remits. So yeah.
Awesome. Brilliant. So we're gonna, as Marc said, we're gonna have today's topic is to do with eating disorders, and really anything around that topic is very, very welcome as well. So I'm going to try and let Marc chat on as much as possible, as he's the expert. So Marc, just to begin with, just generally speaking, what are eating disorders, and kind of what are we looking for in regards to disordered eating behavior?
Okay. So just to start, this is a disclaimer, I'm not a therapist. However, I've been working in the field of eating disorders for just over 10 years. So there's pretty much nothing I probably haven't seen within this area. I work for a charity within Derbyshire that are also now Midlands based, and we've supported people with eating disorders for the past 14 years, and I've been a part of this organisation for the past 10. We kind of support people in a variety of different ways, but anything I kind of say today, just a disclaimer that I'm not a qualified therapist. I have got a sport and exercise science degree, so I tackle eating disorders from more of a peer-to-peer support perspective rather than a clinical kind of diagnosis perspective. So I'm not a doctor or anything. So I just thought I'd get that out of the way. But that's not to say that I don't know a lot about eating disorders, because I do, and I've worked with them for a long time now. So with regard to your question, what are eating disorders? It's quite a broad question, really, because there's many different types of eating disorders. I mean, people just associate eating disorders with anorexia nervosa, which is probably the one that's most labelled in the media. However, anorexia, off the top of my head, I think only is about 10% of all eating disorders. So actually, anorexia is only a small part of the almost eating disorder spectrum. But like with any mental health difficulty, an eating disorder is essentially a disordered relationship with food that has a significant impact on your day-to-day activities. So somebody with an eating disorder, it would kind of always be on their mind on a day-to-day basis. So, for example, they may not go out for a birthday meal because they are nervous that they don't know how many calories are in the food or whatever. So it's basically anything that has a significant impact on their day-to-day functioning. And obviously there are various severities. There are 4 different types of eating disorders. And basically you've got anorexia nervosa. This is probably the most dangerous one. And this stat will probably surprise quite a few people. So anorexia nervosa is actually the psychological condition that has the highest death rate out of any other psychological illness.
Wow.
So it's
right across the board.
Right across the board. So any type of mental health difficulty, depression, anxiety, anorexia nervosa has got the highest death rate, highest mortality rate out of all psychological illnesses. So it just shows you how serious and how dangerous it is, and why it's so spoken about in the media. So anorexia nervosa, off the top of my head, it's basically defined as somebody who's got an extremely low BMI, so obviously extremely low body weight, has severe body image disturbances, and is very distorted in their view. So, for example, when they look in the mirror, they'll see themselves as a lot larger than they are.
Yeah.
So they're the kind of a couple of the main characteristics of anorexia nervosa. But obviously, it's the quite it's the severest in terms of your physical health and physical being, and obviously it gets a lot of attention from the media because people who struggle with anorexia are often very underweight and quite emaciated, and you can kind of tell.
It's very visible.
Almost, yeah, very visible. Almost like a bodybuilder, essentially, just before his show. Obviously, his face looks very gaunt, or her face looks very gaunt. They're incredibly lean, etc. So, yeah, anorexia nervosa is a very interesting one. Remind me in a little bit to talk about the Minnesota starvation experiment. Would be really cool. That'd be really cool to talk about because that relates nicely with anorexia. So moving on, so that's anorexia. You've also got bulimia nervosa. Now, bulimia nervosa is basically the next probably most spoken about eating disorder. And contrary to belief, it's not just someone eating and then being sick. People often think that is what bulimia is, but bulimia is basically someone who might eat a large kind of inordinary amount of food in one sitting or over a few sittings, and then purge that food in order to try and get rid of it. So they'll basically eat a lot of food and feel guilty, and then they will try and get rid of that food, which might be via self-induced vomiting, over-exercise,
interesting.
Diuretic abuse, laxative abuse. So anything to almost purge that food and get rid of it out of their body, because obviously they're feeling the guilt for eating such a large amount.
And this, just to interrupt you, can this be a premeditated thing as well? So can they think, okay, I'm going to have this binge? And
So it's crazy. Yeah. So like a few people I've worked with at First Steps, basically they kind of, it's almost a planned activity. So for example, if someone is in a relationship with someone, they'll kind of plan, oh, I know my partner is out of the house between 5 and 7 p.m. tonight. So that means I can go to Asda, spend a couple £100 on food and then just binge on it and then get rid of it. So I've heard stories, honestly, that and bizarrely enough, Faz, as well, it's not, people think, oh yeah, I've had a binge tonight, I've had loads of pizza and I've had loads of ice cream. It's not necessarily on nice foods either. So it can be random things like, I've heard of people like having oats with tomato ketchup mixed together and just anything. And it's almost like you just, in people I've worked with, basically they describe it as almost blacking out during the binge. So they almost like, they're in almost autopilot mode where they can't really control what they're doing. It's basically defined as an out of control binge episode, pretty much. Now I'll move on to the third, but before I mention that as well, I forgot to mention that these are categories. However, what you often find in eating disorders is that people move from one category to the next often.
Okay.
So someone might struggle with anorexia for a while, and then they might move on to bulimia. And then do you know what I mean? So just because they're categories, it doesn't mean that someone can't go from one to another. And that is often when someone is in recovery from an eating disorder, often experienced. Because if you think about someone that's got anorexia, for example, if you think of anorexia kind of like just after a bodybuilding show, you've decided that, okay, I need to do my post-comp recovery now. Someone with anorexia were like, right, I want to focus on recovery. So it's kind of like a similar thing, because after a bodybuilding show, I know when I competed, all of my hunger hormones, etc., were just out of whack and just bizarre. So like, you can see why when someone is in recovery from anorexia, they binge, because obviously they don't know what it's like to feel full. They almost forget what it's like because they've been starving themselves for so long. And then what happens is they obviously, they maybe binge and feel out of control around food, and then they feel like, oh, I feel guilty now. Oh gosh, what, I've just eaten all this food. I need to get rid of it. So then it can kind of turn into bulimia, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. It leads me to a question I was going to ask at the end of this, but I'll ask it now anyway. So presumably there's a commonality in terms of psychological traits, physiological traits. Presumably there's a commonality across all 4 categories.
Oh yes, massively. So someone who is struggling with an eating disorder, I always tell my clients that I work with, not any Tom, Dick and Harry can get an eating disorder. An eating disorder basically sort of affects as you say, only certain people with certain personality types that are more predisposed to kind of struggling. So one of the traits you'll often see 9 times out of 10 is that person would be very perfectionist in their nature. So like wanting everything to be perfect. Another one is quite sensitive. Maybe the person might be quite sensitive to criticism. So for example, obviously if they've been criticised in childhood, maybe, I don't know, being a little bit overweight, that might stick with them for a long time, and they might want to then do something about it. People with eating disorders also tend to have a bit more of an obsessive nature about their being.
The way you're describing that, it's almost bodybuilding to a T, isn't it, really?
It is, and that's why it's so apt, and it's such an under-recognised area within the bodybuilding community, and it's almost a taboo subject as well. People don't really want to talk about it because it, as you say, it's so close to home almost. So there are a few personality traits to look out for.
But crack on with the rest of the 2 categories.
So then obviously you've got binge eating disorder. So binge eating disorder is basically so if you think of the bulimia, so trying to eat a large amount of food and then getting rid of it. Binge eating disorder is basically just eating a large amount of food and then feeling guilty, but then kind of not doing anything about it.
Yeah, gotcha.
So people with binge eating disorder might often put a lot of weight on in a short amount of time, or they just might be quite overweight and maybe even sort of obese. So obviously that's not to underestimate the impact that binge eating disorder can still have on someone's life. Obviously it's associated with a lot of different health conditions like type 2 diabetes, obesity, etc. And then finally,
I was just going to say, it's amazing. Just hearing you say this, it's amazing how much a lot of these things are normalized in bodybuilding social media. The whole feeling guilty about binging. I mean, I can think of memes like that, but that's actually potentially a road towards a serious disorder.
Amazing. And it's, as you say, like you're saying, and I guess hopefully this podcast will help to educate people to kind of become more aware of these conditions, because they are serious psychological health conditions that can really have a negative impact on someone's life, really. Yeah,
well, what I wanted to end with today, later on, is just talking about some of our strategies that you and I use as coaches. And I think you and I coach very similar sort of ways, and we are both very much against a lot of these fads which look at extremes, because I think a lot of those do mirror bad eating patterns.
Of course they do.
But we'll
hugely.
But anyway, the fourth category.
So fourth category is a new one, actually. It used to be called EDNOS, which stands for Eating Disorders Not Otherwise Specified, but now it's OFSED, which stands for Other Feeding or basically Specified Eating Disorders. So it's basically anything that doesn't fit under the anorexia, the bulimia, and the binge eating disorder categories, which actually makes up 50 to 70% of all eating disorders. So OFSED is actually the most kind of the main category, believe it or not, out of all the others. So it's basically anything that doesn't fit into those 3 criteria. So essentially you've got like, so you could have orthorexia nervosa. I'm not sure if you've heard of that one.
I've not, sorry, no.
So orthorexia nervosa is really an interesting one within the bodybuilding community. Not so much now, interestingly. Now there's this if it fits your macros, flexible dieting movement. But basically orthorexia nervosa is people that have an unhealthy obsession with eating clean foods. So like bro foods, essentially. So chicken, rice and broccoli, oats, chicken, rice and broccoli oats. And basically, if they come away from eating those food items that are on their safe list for eating, they would feel immense guilt. And they would almost be scared to not eat those foods, like psychologically scared, like it was a phobia, like it was a fear. So that's orthorexia nervosa, and obviously that is rife within the bodybuilding community, absolutely rife, but people don't acknowledge it.
100%,
Another one is a really interesting one is diabulimia, which is basically where people who are type 1 diabetic actually misuse their insulin in order to deal with incoming food, basically. So I believe I think I'm not too sure on my insulin and things like that, but I think they overshoot their insulin in order to get rid of the food that they've eaten. And that can almost cause things like blindness, amputated limbs, things like that. And it's absolutely crazy, but that's like quite an emerging condition. And then there's a charity in London called Diabetics with Eating Disorders that actually support people with that. So if anyone's struggling with that that's listening today, obviously it's something you can go and research. But yeah, that's also quite common, and I assume that it's also quite common probably within the bodybuilding community.
You're absolutely right. Yeah, I was just about to say.
Enhanced community. Yeah,
you're absolutely right. Amongst the enhanced community, I've heard of people doing that. That's definitely something that's there.
Yeah, and it's so dangerous, isn't it? Obviously,
Absolutely.
insulin is such a powerful hormone, and obviously misusing it inappropriately can obviously lead to quite disastrous consequences. Really.
So, would you say that one of the commonalities amongst all four categories is the feelings of guilt? So it's essentially how you deal.
Yeah, it's feelings of guilt, and it's control. It's control, mate. It's control.
Yeah.
All eating disorders are essentially a coping mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
They are a way of coping with the difficulties of life, but using food or whatever around food as a way of coping with those difficulties in life. So someone with an eating disorder, they might, for example, have a bad day at work, say to themselves, oh, it's all right, I can come home and binge later. It'll make me feel better. So like as someone that doesn't struggle with an eating disorder, they might go home and, I don't know, binge watch Netflix, or I don't know, have a couple of glasses of wine and have healthy coping mechanisms.
Yeah.
But with more of an eating disorder, basically their only coping mechanism is food.
And I suppose they're doing it in an unhealthy way as well. So with an unhealthy mindset. Whereas it's a case of, I mean, you've heard of presumably people who are in a breakup, a long-term relationship, they get a breakup, and then all of a sudden they start a new exercise regime, and that's like that's a positive way of dealing with something, you know. Whereas this is more the case of we're saying we're going to do that, but we're going to do it with almost a negative mindset. Punishing yourself to get in shape.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
it is a form of punishment, just like any other mental health issues such as self-harm, things like that. It's a form of outlet almost, and obviously when you're thinking about the eating disorder, you're not thinking about anything else, so you're not bothered about the relationship that's just ended. You know, that's right. You're not bothered about the death of your loved one. You know, because you're focused on this eating disorder. You know what I mean?
That's it.
Like
absolutely. That's I mean, super interesting for me and enlightening as well. I didn't know about a couple of those categories, but good sort of education for the audience in terms of general eating disorders and what we're looking for. Now, what I wanted to do today was tie that first part into where we need to be careful of this in terms of either A, bodybuilding, or B, just general gym, gym bunny, getting in shape kind of thing. So let's talk about sort of like either bodybuilding or just general going to the gym and living the lifestyle. Where do we need to be careful? Which parts of the year, during which phases do we need to be kind of really careful of this?
Right. Yeah. It's a weird one, isn't it? So it's a weird one. As you say, you've got two almost cohorts here. You've got the bodybuilding, this is my lifestyle community, and this is me. And then you've also got the people that just like to keep fit and healthy that could also go down that road. So in terms of the bodybuilding lifestyle community, obviously the big area where you've got to kind of look out for this is in season. So when you are dieting for a show. Yeah, absolutely. And then also, so that's got kind of pre-comp, and also probably more so is post-comp. Because obviously when you're coming out of a competition, as we spoke about with anorexia, your hunger hormones and things like that are all out of whack. But let's face it, bodybuilding is not healthy. No, it's not a healthy in season bodybuilding is not healthy. End of life. It's a very unhealthy sport, and you essentially you diet down to your essential body fat levels, and it just puts your body out of complete whack.
I mean, to anyone listening, if you've not competed in a bodybuilding contest and you look at those guys thinking, oh, they look fantastic, look healthy, trust me, we do not. We feel like crap on the day. You know, enhanced, not enhanced, you're going to feel like shit on the day. It's
you're almost it's almost induced self-starvation, and it's a fantastic sport. It's amazing. I love it. but it is just so dangerous if it's not managed properly. I would never personally advise dieting down without a coach.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying hire me or Faz, but I'm just saying that any coach will help, because you need that third eye, that different perspective, because everything when you're dieting, as many of you have probably experienced, is that everything goes out of whack in terms of not just your physical health, your psychological health.
Yeah.
You start becoming more obsessed with things. And this brings me on nicely to the Minnesota starvation experiment.
Yes.
So have you ever heard of that one, Faz?
Well, yeah, just to give the audience a bit of a brief overview. I'm just going off my memory here because I've not thought I'd read about it for a while. But essentially, they did an experiment where they starved a group of men. I think it was just men.
Yeah.
Over the course of how long was it, Mark?
It was. I think it was.
It was a while, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think it was a good 6 to 9 months.
Yeah, I want to say about 3 to 6 months. Yeah, something about 6 months.
I think it might have been about 6 months. I think the actual dieting was just 12 weeks.
Yeah.
But then the follow up, and then obviously the followed up on that because they wanted to see the impact it had.
That's right. Yeah. And I think they got them down to very, very low body fat levels.
I think it was 25. I think they all lost 25%.
That's right. Yes.
Their own body weight or something like that.
And it wasn't necessarily starvation per se, but they actually did have a set calorie level, which was very, very low. I think it was 1,200 or something.
Yes, it was 1,200, and they also had to do a certain amount of exercise every day. I think it was running or something. Yeah.
I mean, so for those listening who are actually potentially thinking about eating 1,200 calories, don't. That's
definitely
right.
Definitely.
So sorry, carry on.
Yeah, so basically, this was an experiment by a chap called Dr. Ansel Keys. So you can give this a Google. It's called the Minnesota Starvation Experiment, and it was done, I think, just after the Second World War. I think they wouldn't be able to repeat it, which is the amazing thing about the experiment, because obviously they wouldn't get ethical approval now, because obviously it's such a you can't really starve people anymore.
That's right.
You might be able to starve animals, but you could definitely can't starve humans. So basically, what this chap wanted to do was basically observe what happened when people were starved. Simple as that. So a healthy, psychologically healthy group of individuals kind of volunteered to do this. I think it was either volunteering to do this or basically doing something else, and they basically opted for this. Can't remember how many participants there were, but basically what he did was he observed this sample. There was obviously a few dropouts. They lost an incredible amount of weight, obviously, and he observed them. He observed what happened to them physically. He observed what happened to them psychologically. So I think if we just look at the psychological things, basically all of these individuals who were basically healthy previously, this is why it relates to bodybuilding, because it's basically what happens when you're dieting down for a show. They all started experiencing different crazy things. Like, he was observing their conversations, he was observing their daily habits and things like that. There was one chap that basically started having dreams about food.
We've all done that pre-contest.
You see, he was dreaming about having a big massive burger or something, and it's just wow. So that was one of them. Another one was there was a guy that basically started drinking 20 cups of black coffee a day and literally constantly eating chewing gum, things like that. There was another chap that basically all of their conversations started to turn to about food. They was just obsessed about food. So one guy was obsessed about watching cooking programs. Another guy was saying that, when I come out of here and when we finish this experiment, I'm going to become a chef. Another guy was complaining about how his body looked. So all of these things that happened during this experiment, this is the important bit. So this is the bit I want people to get today, is that these things were a consequence. So these psychological issues that these chaps developed were a consequence of the dieting. So let me just repeat that. They were a consequence of the dieting. These chaps, if they didn't diet, wouldn't have experienced these psychological issues. So when you're dieting for a bodybuilding show, essentially you are choosing to diet, and like the Minnesota experiment, you're choosing to diet and you're choosing to lose a certain amount of body fat. Now, these things, if you are not careful, these psychological issues will also become apparent during your dieting phase.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when we spoke about eating disorders earlier, and we spoke about the predisposition, the certain characteristics, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
the obsessiveness, the perfectionism, that,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, all of these things, these predisposed characteristics get worse when you diet.
Mm-hmm.
They get worse.
Yeah.
So they say that basically with eating disorders, the genetics load the gun, and the environment pulls the trigger.
Interesting. Yeah.
So basically, when someone goes on to develop an eating disorder, they'll obviously be predisposed to it. So they might have a family history, they might have these personality traits, but it is the environment that then pulls the trigger.
Interesting.
So if you're dieting for a bodybuilding show and you've got these characteristics, be very, 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 very careful.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to ask was, in your research or just in your thoughts in general, do you think age has got anything to do with this? So when I did my bodybuilding competition, I felt that my habits and my physiology and my psychology were pretty much set. I'm obviously a fair bit older, so
yes,
I think it perhaps potentially offered me a little bit of protection, because I never experienced it. Fortunately, touch wood, I never experienced any of those things.
Yeah.
Do you think that's a possibility?
The research shows that 18 to 25-year-olds are most likely to be affected by eating disorders.
Which makes sense, because the mind is still developing at that stage.
Still developing.
Yeah.
However, that does not mean to say that people can't develop an eating disorder in their 50s or 60s.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean to say that people younger than that can't develop one, because we've worked with people as young as 5 at our organisation, which is crazy.
That is crazy.
It's becoming younger and younger as well. So basically pre-contest is to be aware. Post-contest is to be aware as well, because if you've just got shredded for a show, I remember Lyle McDonald talking about this on a podcast.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you can relate to this, Faz. I certainly can. When you've been shredded and when you've been extremely lean, anything above that point, you feel fat. You feel fat.
Yes.
Yeah, your mind is just warped. It's crazy. So basically, if you've been like shredded and you've had abs and look wicked, anything above that point, you feel fat.
Yeah,
now,
and if you say that to someone, they think you're crazy, because
they think you're crazy, and but you've got to, unless you've been there and done it, it's crazy. But you've got to kind of, from that point, you've got to say, okay, all right, this is how I dealt with it. Was you've got to accept yourself. Yeah. So if you don't love yourself, no matter how fat or thin you are, you've not got a chance.
True.
Because you're basing your whole self-worth, that your whole how you feel about yourself, on something that is outward and appearance based. Now, the dieting down for a bodybuilding show, as we just spoke about, is incredibly unhealthy. So the dream to carry that body fat percentage and that physique year round is only a dream, because it is not realistic, natural or enhanced.
I mean, I can just say that to the audience right now. I don't know anybody who carries that level of competition year round, and a lot of people will think that's the case. Like, I remember getting some comments from people when I'd finished my bodybuilding competition, and they said, oh, because perhaps they could see I'd been putting on some weight. They said, oh, you're just relaxing now. You're not. Are you taking it off the gas? I'm like, actually, no, I'm not. Thank you. Cheers for that. Cheers for just building those issues up in my head. I think that's really interesting. So we've talked about in season. And I think that's probably the biggest danger area. I also wanted to touch a little bit on off season, and me personally, I've got a real I'm going to say hatred. It's quite a strong word, but I'm going to say hatred against
that's cool.
Off-season wacky protocols like high days, low days, obsessively eating certain macros on one day, other macros on another, or just high days and low days and whatnot. I generally, with my clients, I work with a weekly average. And a weekly average
Yeah,
accounts for,
yeah,
it works really well. It accounts for the ups and downs. I mean, a client isn't going to know if they're going to be particularly hungry one day, particularly not hungry the other.
no,
The coach doesn't
no,
stand
that's
a
it.
chance. So you go with a weekly average, and from a weekly average, you can make sure they're on a reasonable track. For myself, I do certain things like fasting as well, but I do those for health reasons. I've talked about it before in other podcasts, but in general, I use a weekly average.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of some of these more specific, let's say, dietary adherence challenges that I'm going to call them challenges because I don't believe they have any value. These specific adherence challenges that some coaches give to their clients. I'm going to ask you the really obvious question: are we staring down, the barrel of the gun there as well in terms of eating disorders?
I personally think, and I know Eric Helms is quite supportive of this approach. I personally think that the off season is the off season. So the off season should be used to not just get back to a level of physical health, but also get back to a level of mental and psychological health.
Yes.
Now, I think I've started. I'm going to go on a rant now. Can I go on a rant?
Please do. I love a good rant.
Yeah, because I know we spoke about this before.
Yeah.
Having high carb, low carb, medium carb, zero carb, blah, 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 blah. I think that it is just going to serve to worsen that perfectionist OCD, obsessive mentality towards food.
Yeah.
The goal of the off season. What is the goal of an off season? The goal of an off season is to build muscle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And to probably get stronger and to keep a relatively healthy level of body fat percentage.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. To keep a healthy level of body fat percentage, you want to be around maybe 10 to 15%. Yeah. Probably not go above that. So why do you need to mess around with high carb, medium, low carb, whatever carb days if your goal is to build muscle and keep a respectable body fat percentage? You do not need, personally, I do not believe that you need to micromanage your food intake like that, because one, as we said, the goal is to get healthier mentally and psychologically.
Yep.
If you're upping and lowering your carbs every single day and having to track them to the gram, it is basically providing a psychological feedback mechanism in your brain that this behavior is okay and normal.
Mm-hmm.
That behavior is not okay and normal. Your goal in the off season, like you've just said, Faz, should be to almost to still track, but not so much that it is having a psychological impact and affecting your day-to-day life. Mm-hmm. So you could maybe, like you say, you could have a weekly average. So as long as I'm hitting X number a week or whatever, that's fine. Or go on.
I was just going to say, if we also bring this back to what you said earlier, this is binge purge behavior. So, and I think we need to put that out there. I think we need to put it out there and say, look, this is your coach's optimization, but you know what it is? It's binge purge behavior. Let's not joke around. And the orthorexia nervosa, I believe that's a similar thing here as well, because you're focusing on specific foods. Yeah.
Well, if you're having a high day, that is your binge day,
right?
Or what I actually hate. This is my cheat day.
Yeah, I mean, that's even worse.
No, mate, that's not your cheat day. That's your unhealthy binge eating day.
Right.
That is actually quite dangerous for your mental health.
Yeah.
So basically, if you have these high days and you have these low days, essentially low day, you're starving yourself. High day, you're binging.
Yeah.
That is basically it. And then basically what people are doing, what coaches are doing is almost verifying that behavior and validating it.
Yeah.
So that these people think, oh yeah, this is cool to do that, and then they're not even acknowledging the fact that this is actually giving them a mental health problem.
Yeah, and the worst thing is, well, a lot of these people who are very particular, the perfectionists, these are all characteristics of really good bodybuilders. So generally, a coach will probably get fairly good results with these clients doing that, but then at what cost? That's my issue. What cost?
And that's it. At what cost? How is that affecting their day-to-day life?
Yeah.
Bodybuilding isn't healthy anyway, but how is that improving their daily life? Because I guarantee that it is having a severe impact at home.
Yeah. And I had Joe Jeffries on the podcast recently. We talked about adherence. So setting your clients a challenge, like high days and low days to increase adherence. And we had a really interesting conversation on that. And me and him both agree that it's basically just done to serve the client's interest. It's just done to increase sustainability.
It's to try and because if you're changing things from week to week, or whatever, like you're keeping your client's interest. If you're not changing stuff for like a month, that client's gonna be like, well, I'm paying this coach X amount a month.
Exactly.
Why the heck isn't he doing anything? Why the heck isn't he changing
anything? Whereas the reality is changing things that often, like once a week or intra week, 2 or 3 times a week, that's just playing into this bad behavior. Yeah.
Of course it is, because it's just, it's increasing your obsession, essentially. And the goal for everyone really in the off season should to be almost get away from tracking and learn how to eat a bit more intuitively. I mean, I spoke to Kim Santino down at the gym the other day, who's obviously a competitive bodybuilder. I said to him, do you track in your off season then, Kim? No, he doesn't track.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah, and you see, and I was like, oh wow. And I said, that's good on you. That's great. Yeah. And this is a guy that's got a 9-year-old child. So obviously it's having a positive impact on his child's life because he's not being so obsessed with tracking his food and calories.
Yeah.
And he's an off-season bodybuilder that's going to be dieting for a show soon. And he's not excessively overweight.
No, not at all. I've seen him. He looks in great shape. I think this reminds me of that Sasan Hirati video where he talks about the off-season. And his exact words halfway through that are, you have to learn to relax in the off-season because once it's the in-season, then, it gets a lot harder. So you have to be able to switch off. And I don't really like this whole new move towards calling it an improvement season or whatever.
No.
It's an off-season for a reason because you need to relax.
Yeah.
It's definitely an off-season.
Yeah. Just like in any other sport,
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah. So we've looked at what eating disorders are, 4 categories of eating disorders. We've matched that to 2 things. One is sort of in-season contest prep, and 2 is kind of off-season wacky protocols. Looked at specific populations as well. So we've covered quite a lot. Is there anything else that we could share to the audience which could be helpful to them for bodybuilding?
I just think, to be honest, just to look out for any strange type behaviours like that. So if your partner, this is generally quite a good sign. If someone that knows you really well, a partner, a close friend, a close family member, mum or dad, notices that your behaviour with food is strange and slightly disordered, and you're in denial about that, and are saying, oh well, I'm a bodybuilder, I have to do this. That is generally a sign that things are probably unhealthy. Now, I'm not saying that you have to necessarily go and seek help for that. However, there will probably become a point where you will acknowledge that it is a problem, and you'll probably have to go and seek help, psychological help.
And you know what? Can we just accept how little difference, if any, a lot of these wacky protocols make to someone's actual progress?
Well, I'm a prime example. When I was manipulating my carbs, high, low, and medium days back in the day, my results were significantly worse than they are now. Because why, if you're in the off season, why the heck do you want a low day?
Yeah, exactly. Makes no sense.
Really? It's my rest day. Yeah, but you still need carbohydrates on a rest day.
Yeah, and you still need to recover, and presumably you're going to be training the day after.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've heard of people having low carb days, and then training the next morning. I mean, that makes no sense because you don't even have time. It's just you don't even have time to reglycogenate. So it's ridiculous. So you know what?
Like say, go on.
I was just saying,
it's micromanagement for the sake of micromanagement, isn't it? It's just, as you say, it's to try and sell things. And I remember I heard on a podcast before that Charles Poliquin, rest his soul, he used to when he went through a amazing period. He was an amazing coach and everything, but then he kind of what seems to happen when these coaches get a little bit older, they start to come out with quacky ideas. Crazy stuff. It's really weird, and I do think it is just to sell.
Yeah, I think so.
It is, isn't it?
It is. I believe so.
It's like they are amazing coaches. Like when they start and they come out with all these amazing theories and they're revolutionized training, and then it's almost like, well, I've sold that now. What do I do?
Yeah.
Oh, I'll come out with like all this crazy stuff, and it just doesn't. Yeah, it's just
No, I totally agree.
It's about money, isn't it? Essentially,
I think so. Yeah. I mean, the talk that I had with Joe was in essence thinking about do I want to go down that moral road of potentially giving clients more of a carrot across the week to increase adherence, but at the same time potentially damaging their relationship with food. And I still haven't. I said during the podcast that I would experiment with that, but I still not, because I'm not sure in good conscience I could do that to a client.
No, it's yeah. You as a coach, you are in a position of responsibility.
Yes. Yeah.
You are in a position of responsibility, whether it's online or whether it's face to face. You are in a position of responsibility. Someone's physical and psychological health is in your hands as a bodybuilding coach, or as a whatever coach, whoever you're coaching. Why would you want to put that person's health in jeopardy?
Mm-hmm.
You know, just so that person might stay with you for an extra year because they think that you're doing something that they can't do by themselves. Sort of thing.
Exactly. You know, just to end on a kind of a productive note.
Yeah.
Let's talk about some of the things that, because we both love bodybuilding. We both competed.
Oh yeah.
And it's still a fantastic sport. So let's not, rather than give it a sort of a negative outlook to the whole thing.
No.
We'll because you and I have both competed. We've both competed healthily as well. Healthily.
Yeah.
So let's talk about some strategies that you can employ. Now I'll say a little bit something about contest prep. The way that I did it with my coaches, Chester and Addingpins, they were fantastic. And essentially the way they coached me was my diet was macros. Now, if I ever got into a problem with like hunger or all that kind of stuff, they would provide me with options. But in general, they let me get on with things and let me eat the way I wanted to eat. Now, I'll tell you this, right up until probably 4 to 6 weeks out, I was having some crisp or some chocolate pretty much every day. And it was not a problem because I fit it into my macros. And after the competition, I remember prior to the competition thinking, oh, I'm going to eat this, I'm going to eat that. But after the competition, I had no cravings at all. Absolutely zero. So it reminded me of that study where they sort of restricted bread from a diet group and let the other group just eat on. I'm sure you read that one. And the ones who restricted bread, they had much more issues. So I didn't really restrict anything until the last few weeks when I just didn't have the calories.
Well, you had to,
I had to. And at that point, I was so tired, I didn't really have an appetite either. But so that was one way. I kept a very loose, if it's your macro schedule, and I didn't deny myself any particular food. Probably the only thing that I was craving was a full English breakfast because that's like 1,000 calories. So I couldn't really do that. But there wasn't really anything specific that I was craving. So I didn't get any of those issues potentially for that reason. No. So was there anything else that we can do sort of in a healthy way to make sure? Right.
I think like trying to maybe, I don't know, focus on trying to keep someone's numbers or calories as high as they can while still losing weight and body fat.
Absolutely.
A really useful strategy we used within my prep was I'm sure this is like crazy. Like we got down to like maybe 6% for my show.
Well, you were absolutely shredded. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Insane.
And what was my ending calorie? Was it 2,400?
It was 2,500 the week before. Sorry, 2,500 2 weeks before, and we actually cruised in.
Yes.
Contest at 3K. 3K calories.
Yeah. So basically, we dieted essentially on 2,500 calories.
That's right.
My body weight is not high either. So like,
I think you competed at 155 for that show.
Yeah. So we found that just increasing my step count per day, so i.e. exercise, energy expenditure, whatever you want to call it, is a way to offset the reduction in neat non-exercise activity thermogenesis that actually happens when dieting. To offset that, we basically just set ourselves a step goal of like 15 to 25,000 a day. And
and
that almost kept it going, didn't it?
Yeah, and to say to the audience as well, it was definitely steps, so general activity across the day. I wasn't mandating actual cardio, treadmill, all that kind of stuff. It was just being busy.
It was literally just a morning walk for an hour and a half because I enjoyed morning walks.
Yeah, that's it. I remember. Yeah, you still do them. Yeah,
still do them, and obviously in the off season it's just less and more for the purposes of actually enjoying going on a walk and things.
Yeah, I know. I think that's quite a healthy habit you've got there, actually, Mark. I know you go for a walk in the mornings just by yourself. Clear the mind before the day.
Of like mindfulness stuff, and it just helps wake me up and set me up for the day. Really,
that's a good idea.
If you're just getting straight out of bed and just going straight to work or whatever, you just you're kind of still in zombie mode, aren't you? So
Yeah,
but yeah, I think for that, like you say, was obviously as you approach my dieting as well, we used a flexible approach, so that
absolutely.
essentially no foods were out of bounds.
Yeah.
We also had phases of higher calorie intake, so
Yeah.
we would have a week, instead of like having maybe a refeed day, we actually had like a refeed week where we raised calories for a week or two, which obviously we've spoken about this before, and we probably both feel that having one refeed day only really serves to restore your glycogen, whereas actually having a longer refeed period or a diet break can actually offset a lot of the things that happen when dieting. So obviously just keeping diet breaks within a dieting phase is quite useful, because you're not on the eating disorder area, you're not basically constantly restricting your food. You're actually having a week of almost normal eating, or 2 weeks of more normalized eating, and it's getting you out of that restricting mindset and mentality.
You know, that's something that I use with my clients quite a lot. And it's one that I have. One of my more dramatic transformations was a guy called Ben, and people have seen him on my Instagram.
I've seen him.
Quite a huge journey. And he's lost 60 pounds of body fat, and we've
Fantastic.
regained. It's amazing, and he's regained 25 pounds currently of just lean weight. And a big part of what we did during his initial cut down was we did a lot of maintenance weeks. And I really prioritize that. And I've got a couple of clients who've just started with me recently, and I prioritize maintenance weeks. I think they're very, very valuable to teach the client how to eat after the diet, you know?
Because you forget, and it becomes, it becomes normal. Like when people say, oh, how can you diet like that? Because you kind of know that essentially it's going to be over, and then you can get back to normal. It's only a temporary thing, isn't it? You know?
And you know what? Sometimes people haven't. It's not even that it's normal, but people just haven't been coached to eat at maintenance. So and you see this with competitors. They know how to bulk, they know how to cut, but staying in the maintenance, they don't know how to do it. They've never been coached to do it.
Yeah, because people constantly think that they have to be gaining or losing.
Yeah.
Where it's actually as we're doing at the moment with myself and you're coaching with me, we're actually pretty much at maintenance, but we're actually losing body fat and gaining muscle and recomping from having a maintenance calorie intake and just focusing on getting stronger in the gym and
that's right. Yeah.
More productive in the gym.
Yeah. So the thinking behind Mark's current situation is he's just switched over to a new gym, as I have as well. So it's not really the time to be bulking on a new routine. So once he gets used to new routine, he's got his strength up, then we're going to add the calories in, and that makes more sense. So it serves a dual purpose of, one, he doesn't need the calories just yet, and two, he's able to practice a maintenance week, which is really useful. Yeah.
And get used to new kit and new equipment and things, and and a different environment as well.
Absolutely. Makes a big difference. Yeah. I love it. I think this conversation's been fantastic, Mark.
It's been awesome. Yeah, I loved it.
Really happy to have had you on, and I think we've covered so much. This has been awesome. I really appreciate you having you on. We will definitely have to do it again. So what I'll do is I'll add in all of your contact details for the audience.
Oh, fantastic.
Wherever I put the podcast, so on my Facebook, Instagram, and all that kind of stuff. Right. But yeah, just a big thank you for having you on. I really appreciate it. And yeah, we'll do it again.
No, that's great. Thanks very much.
Cheers, Mark. Right, we'll call it there, mate.
Cheers. Take care.